welcome to Sleuthwood. My guest today is Luan Roberts.
Hello.
Who I've known for a while,
yeah,
right? Yeah,
a few years now. Yeah.
And Luan is a dockfouler. Do you want to explain what that means?
Sure. So I go out to floating docks that are typically at marinas. So think about the kind of dock that lays on the surface of the water, not something that's suspended in the air. It's right there at the surface of the water, and I lay down on these docks and I look over the side of them and I see all of the different organisms that are growing on the side of it. And this is in a marine environment, and I observe these organisms and take photos of them and document my observations. And it's called dockfouling because the organisms are considered they're a nuisance. They're fouling the dock. They're undesired there. They're just growing because the dock exists, and the marina owners don't necessarily want them there. So hence the term fouling.
And there's a lot that grows on docks.
Mm-hmm.
There are like virtual gardens underneath those docks, and nobody notices because they're just walking along the surface. And it's always funny to be laying there, and people say, "What's going on? What are you doing?"
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm looking for things, and then as soon as they look over, they're like, "Wow!" And they've never seen it before.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's not because they haven't been there a lot. It's often like people who are fishermen or boat owners who walk by there every day. They're not even looking at it at all. I mean, they might notice that there's some kelp attached to the side, but they're not really observing what's going on there. I think they find it as a surprise when they first start looking.
And they're like, what are some of the organisms? There's tons, and
Mm-hmm.
I know it's different. Each dock is a little bit different. But
Mm-hmm.
what are some of the more common organisms that you see a lot of?
So the first thing I think about on the docks out here are the northern feather duster worms, and they the part of them that you normally see is like this like pom-pom almost that comes out of the end, and it's like a black and maroon color, and they're just in massive clusters. So they're coming out of these tubes, and then often surrounding them you'll see anemones of different species, and you might see some sea stars. Definitely organisms like barnacles and mussels are there, and my favorite is the nudibranchs. But most of what you're going to see when you're looking down there are sessile organisms that are attached to the side. They're not really moving around or going anywhere.
The feather duster worms, I had to tell you real quick because I went out to, I think, Bremerton a few months ago, and they were spawning.
Oh man, yeah, when they're like shooting their sperm out, and it's just like it looks almost like bird poo and like strings coming out from there. Yeah,
it was everywhere.
Yeah, and it happens all at once.
Right.
It's not like one is having a spawning moment on its own. It's like everybody's having it.
Mass like strings of white
everywhere.
Yeah,
mm-hmm.
Yeah. It was a bit obscene. But the sessile organisms, they create a home.
Mm-hmm.
So that you get layers upon layers upon layers. Because I've seen like things on the feather duster tube, worms, on their tubes, and then so it's just like that's like that song. There's a hole in the bottom of the sea.
Yeah, no, it just keeps on going. Like on the tubes of the worm, you'll get like hydroid or like sponge or tunicate, and then you'll get nudibranchs on top of that, and yeah, it's just there's so many layers to it, and you don't even realize what you're looking at. It's like you could take one photo and then come back to it many times with new knowledge and see like different creatures and different things each time.
It's fascinating because like we think of the forest as a habitat,
mm-hmm.
the forest and the trees and the shrubs and everything, or tide pools even. But like we don't think of docks as a habitat,
mm-hmm.
but it's a really like rich habitat that people don't know about.
No, and I think it's definitely almost like a secret habitat that's there, but it's so interesting because it's like right at the intersection of the wilderness and like humans.
Right.
Like it wouldn't exist with both of those elements. It's a place that is created by man, but like there's only wild things growing on there, and I can't think of like too many places that are kind of like that boundary that you can access so easily like in the city.
Right. Yeah, and Yeah, there's not. I mean, there's like cemeteries maybe, or bridges.
I thought about sewers, but like going into a sewer.
Would that be kind of
yeah. I was thinking of places like where are organisms growing that we've kind of like facilitated but not managed, and that's the only other thing I could come up with.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I have to ask you, you haven't always been a dockfouler.
No.
And you're not a biologist or anything.
Mm-mm.
So what's your background? Like, what do you do for a job?
So I've worked at the grocery store at Whole Foods for over a decade, and I've done various different things there. So it really doesn't relate directly to what I do, but I find that if I have a job I enjoy and it can like fund my passions, then it works out perfectly for me because I have enough time for both.
Right.
You know, and yeah, the two don't really intersect very much, which I kind of enjoy, you know.
Yeah, that's what they say. Don't make your hobby your career.
Exactly.
So, tell me about your growing up. Were you always into nature and stuff, or is this like a newer thing?
It's definitely a newer thing. So, growing up, we didn't have much money growing up, and my parents took us camping like every single weekend, and because we were camping all the time, I kind of resented it. I was like, can we do something that's not camping? We would just go out to the state park and like grill pork chops and stay in the tent. And I was never really into it. And I always reflect back to this time when I was growing up, and I lived on the Isle of Wight, which is a small island off the south coast of England. And I would spend time going on walks, going on the beach. And never once did I have like any sort of interest in like learning about the animals on the beach or anything like that. So I was much more interested. I got my bachelor's in anthropology, so I thought humans were more interesting. I wanted to learn more about like human history, and I thought like if there wasn't what I considered to be an intelligence behind something at the time, then it wasn't very engaging for me. So I wasn't expecting that something natural would take my interest like this.
So how did that happen?
Oh man. Well, a lot of it was living in Seattle. You know, I lived in Colorado, in Texas, in England, and when I came out to Seattle, I didn't know much about the ocean. I didn't know what a tide pool was, but I lived downtown by the waterfront, and I would go sit with my book and read and look at things as I was reading. And at first it was like the harbor seals. I would see their heads pop up, and that was amazing. And then I would notice like the tides going out, and I would see like sea stars and anemones, and seeing those for the first time, if you've never experienced that before, it's very captivating. It's this whole world that's right there that you can access that is just kind of hidden all the time. So once I started getting engaged with that, I'm like, oh, I want to know more. And I kept on going out to all the different parks in Seattle, which I think is so cool about Seattle, that you have these like beach parks that you can go. I wouldn't even call them tide pools. It's more like a rocky, sandy habitat, and you're like looking at the little things, but there's no actual pools. Just going back to those places repeatedly, and there's a little pocket beach downtown at Olympic Sculpture Park, and I lived right by there, so I would go out, I would like start paying attention, like, oh, when's the low tide, and then going out there and discovering things and like figuring out what everything was. And that's really just from experiencing it and being excited. And then I would like show other people, and they didn't know about it either, even though they lived here. And then they would get excited, so it kind of just fed into itself.
How did you learn? Did you just read yourself, or did you take any classes, or were you just entirely self-taught?
For tide pooling, at first I was just teaching myself. I was just looking and then trying to piece together what it was. And occasionally I would run into somebody else doing the same thing, and I might like pick up a piece of knowledge here or there from them. But mostly I was just teaching myself. And then, like, as time went on, I got into a master's program for biology, a master's of arts, and that was much more education-based and more about learning and science communication. It wasn't like a hard science program. And through that, I really wanted to engage people with their natural environment, and I wanted to use tide pooling for that. So that kind of like formed formalized it in a way and kind of
Right.
brought together all those different pieces for me.
Right, and now you know a lot.
Yeah.
If I have a question about nudibranchs, I take it to Luan.
Well, that's the cool thing about nudibranchs is like nobody knows anything
Right.
about them. So if you just spend a lot of time looking at them, you're just gonna know more than somebody else might.
Right. Last week we talked about slime molds with my
Mhm.
guest, and like people don't study it because they don't benefit us. They don't.
Mhm.
We're not. They don't harm us. So it's the same thing with nudibranchs.
Yeah.
Like they don't really benefit. And there's some that are being studied, like for cancer treatments
Mhm.
and climate change and whatnot. But for the most part, they're just there.
Right, exactly, and that's something I really love about it too. Is you can't really monetize it unless you're creating some art or something like that. From like you can't monetize the slug itself. You can't even have them in an aquarium. They're too particular about their diets. Like they're not going to live, so you can't even try and get money from them that way. And I think that's what makes them like kind of special.
Yeah.
You know?
Yep. So anybody who doesn't know what a nudibranch is, do you want to explain what is a nudibranch?
Sure. They are a shellless marine mollusk. So, thinking about it simply, they're just, if you think about land slugs, these are slugs that live in the sea. And they don't share too many characteristics beyond that. They don't have shells. They usually move around on using the foot of their body along a surface. Some of them can kind of bend their bodies back and forth and swim. They're almost exclusively predators. They're very small. They vary in size from a couple millimeters to 20 to 23 centimeters, I think, almost about a foot. So they're small creatures, and they have a variety of different abilities that a lot of people find fascinating, including myself. They can eat anemones and utilize the stinging cells in the anemones to ward off their predators, for example. So they have all these interesting properties. There's a wide variety of species that you can find out here, and I think that's one thing that makes them so interesting is, like, I think about other types of organisms, and you don't see so much variety in such a small space.
Right.
So I think that's what really captivates my interest and you go back out there and you're like, well, how many am I going to find?
And they're hard to find. I mean, because they're so small, but
Mhm.
also because they're seasonal and they hide well. Some of them are camouflaged,
Mhm.
so it's not like you can go out and find barnacles or even
Yeah.
fish because
Mhm.
they're pretty conspicuous. Because nudibranchs are hard to find.
Yep, it's funny because you'll look at a photo of them and they look quite showy and flashy, but then when you see them in context, you'll understand kind of why they look that way. You know, they often blend into the background. Not always. There's some that are just show-offs and you can find a lot easier, but a lot of the time you can't.
Right. And we have a good number of species here in the Northwest.
Yes, I think around 80 to 100, I would say, that you could see in Washington. I think I've seen about 70 or so.
70
different,
now?
yeah, I think it's around that much. I'm not sure. If you include the non-nudibranch sea slugs, then
Right.
probably around that, which just, I can't think of too many other organisms where you're like, oh, I can see 70 or 80 different species. I mean, birds would be the most comparable kind of thing.
Yeah. But birds are easy to find.
I don't think so. It's what your eye is trained to see.
I guess so,
you know?
yeah. But nudibranchs, you have to be on the water. You have to
Mhm.
see them because that's the only place you're going to see them is in salt water,
Right.
not in lakes or anything. And you have to have the right habitat.
Mhm.
So you either have to find a beach with rocks or tide pools or whatever, or even there's some sandy species, but they mostly burrow, so they're harder to find. Or the docks.
Mhm.
So the places you can see them are very limited.
Right, but in some ways that makes them easier to find because you're not looking at all these different
Right.
variety of places.
That's
like
true.
you need these certain features to be able to see them.
And through your time, all the time you spent, how many years has it been anyway since you've been?
I started doing it in 2020, so
Okay.
it's not been that long, 3 years.
But you've really started to recognize where to find certain nudibranchs, like
Mhm.
certain like the green balloon aeolids
Mhm.
on the certain hydroids,
Right.
or the what's the green the
Hedge pest,
yes,
sapsucker?
yes.
Yep, it's always on
Yes.
the bryopsis, which is interesting because, like, the further south you go, it's not going to be on the bryopsis, is something I found. I forgot the other, the green kind of poofy seaweed. I forgot the name of it,
Okay.
but you'll find it on that Calydum. I think that's the name of it.
Okay.
But yeah, it varies from place to place, so it's like almost hyper local what you would expect to see.
Right. And like the field guides, like they give you a general idea of what they eat, but it's so simple. I mean, it's not like a full. And like you said, the regional differences are going to be different.
Right. Well, and the guides that I've seen, they often don't do a great job of describing in detail their food source, and a lot of the time, I think it's because the food source of the nudibranch is an organism that's even less studied than the nudibranch itself. So it's like there's a few, like on iNaturalist, for example, you can see a lot of the nudibranch species, but if you try and identify a hydroid, there's maybe like 2 or 3 that are in there, but good luck otherwise, you know. So it's that's one route to go finding them, but it's more like you have to remember it visually than you're not going to find out the name of them a lot of the time.
Right. And so it's just a lot of experience and kind of that memory of, oh, I saw them on this. That's a good spot to look for these. Or, like we don't know what a lot of their food sources are.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and that's, the reason people can't keep them captive is because you might see a nudibranch on something, but that doesn't mean it's eating it necessarily. You know, there's a lot that we don't know about them.
So their food sources are, you want to talk about like what do they eat? What do nudibranchs eat? Because it's a wide variety of things.
Right. So I would say like Hermaceta crassicornis, which is the horned nudibranch. It's one of the most common species out here. They eat the largest variety of organisms that I know of in a nudibranch, and they'll eat hydroid, which is it's a organism that's related to jellyfish and that kind of family, and they don't move. They look almost like flowers or plants when you look very up close to them, and they have stinging cells on them. They also eat bryozoa, which is often like this lace-like creature that I don't know very much about bryozoa. I know what they look like, but beyond that, I don't really know. They'll eat anemones. A lot of different nudibranchs will eat anemones, but it might just be one specific species. So it's a lot of different things like that. I would say they often eat other creatures that don't look like creatures. They look like plants, you know.
And there's some like the melibes, which are filter feeders, right?
Yeah, they have a big mouth that kind of like engulfs a bunch of different things at once, and I'm not sure exactly what they eat. I mean, you might know more than me.
They filter out, I don't know. But there's one in like Indonesia that actually has been seen eating fish.
Yeah, I've heard about that. Yeah, I mean, you could imagine with the ones I've seen that you could eat very tiny fish with a mouth like that.
The giant mouth, Take a lot of patience, I think.
Yeah, I don't know. Sometimes you just see them going, and they don't really seem to have anything else going on. They're just opening and closing.
But what they eat also impacts it. Like you mentioned the stinging cells, but some of them like change color based on what they eat. Yeah,
like the horned nudibranch. I see different colors in their serrata, and the serrata are these they're these flowing projections on the back of the slug, so that are part of their digestive tract, and they are in different colors, and they can also shed them if they feel threatened. But because it's part of their digestive tract, it really shows the colors of what they're eating, and I'm not quite sure how that works on a biological level, but you can definitely see that with different sea slugs, like I think of the white-lined dirona, they're very, very snow white in some situations, but then if you go see them at like the Fauntleroy dock where there's the sea pens that they're eating, then they're this like pink color. Right. So it can change, but then sometimes their coloration changes because of different reasons, and I don't know all those different reasons.
So they're tricky.
Yeah, and like it's like I don't know sometimes if it's I don't know it or if nobody knows it. It's very hard to like find information on specific species.
Right, because there isn't. I mean, a lot of people don't study them. So well, there's few people that study them.
Yes.
To say. So yeah, we don't have all the information. So that's like not an expert, to go out and like really learn stuff.
No,
and share it.
you have a really good opportunity of learning something new and being able to make a discovery, as it were, that nobody else has really known about, and that makes them so appealing as well.
It's exciting, yeah.
Yeah.
It's like being an explorer.
Yeah.
So tell me, where do you share? You share on Instagram, and you use iNaturalist, and you have a website too.
Yeah, I don't do much with my website. I just don't have much time that I can dedicate towards putting things on there, but it just has a few resources for people who want to get started. I just like there to be something for people out there. And then definitely Instagram has been the best platform. I don't know if I just got lucky or if other people have that experience, but I found that there's such a good community on there that it's very supportive of other people who are doing the same kind of things. And you know, it's, if there's something that I can't identify, then maybe I'll go to Instagram, maybe I'll go to iNaturalist. You know, they both are really good resources.
Right. Do you want to explain what iNaturalist is for anybody who doesn't know?
Yeah. So iNaturalist is a website where people upload observations that they make, mostly photographs, and it includes information like where they saw it, when they saw it, and it's made available publicly for other users to kind of give a yes or a no to, and it has some kind of AI going on where it will help make that initial identification on the photo. And it's a great community there, and all of the observations on there are freely available for anybody to use for any kind of reason. So it's really helpful for me to just upload a batch of photos, and then I have all of those mechanisms in place to say, like, this is what it is, this is where I saw it, and then other people can jump in and say, like, yes, you got it right, or I'm not so sure, and here's why.
That's a great tool, because like I said, field guides are, like, there is one, but there's not a lot, and it's only got one picture, not like bird guides, which have multiple books and lots of angles and all kinds of, like detailed information.
Well, and the other thing is how I'm observing nudibranchs is through docs, and those guides are written by tide poolers or by scuba divers, not by people on docks, and they'll have information in there that I have found to be inaccurate based on my observations, and it'll have things like the depths of the nudibranch, and I'm right by the surface of the water, there is no depth, so it's like I don't know what to trust in those and what not to.
Right, and they also don't have the seasonality, because there's definitely seasonality to nudibranchs, which also isn't well studied.
No, well, I believe Jeff Goddard did some studies. Well, I know he did some studies on how the shifts in climate along the coast kind of affect the nudibranch population. So the seasonality is very much tied to the climate, so it can vary based on what's actually going on. And I think a lot of it just has to do with if their food source is flourishing or not, because they'll, when they hatch from eggs, they're free-floating larvae a lot of the time, and then they'll settle when they found a good food source. So the populations have the ability to shift as the climate changes.
Right, which is a good indication for us to study them. So
yes.
Maybe more people should study them. So you've seen, you would say, about 70 species now? Here?
Yes, I want to say it's about 70 to 80 out
And
here.
you've also gone down to California, I know, to look for nudibranchs.
Yeah, no, there's a lot more people in California who experience nudibranchs on docks. So that's how I initially learned the kind of technique of dockfouling, is going down there and learning from a friend of mine, Cricket, who is also very involved in Instagram, but she showed me her technique, and then when I brought it back here, I tried to seek out other people who were doing it here, and there wasn't really anybody else, so it was a case of like finding my own locations. And then I like to go back down there and say, like, oh, this is what I observed, what do you think? And it's a great way of like getting more knowledge, and not necessarily like blazing a new trail out there, but it's like good to get back to be with people who know more than I do a lot of the time.
And the communal knowledge is really valuable.
Yeah, it's sometimes the only knowledge that I can find on a lot of these creatures.
Which is funny because Cricket is how I met you. Because I met Cricket down in California, and then she told me about you, and then I knew Jen, who also is up here, and so it's kind of like this weird sort of word of mouth community. That
No, I think it's great because there's also like the physical component to it, where I'm sure you've had the experience that if you go to a good tide pooling spot, then if it's a good low tide, chances are you're going to run into somebody that you know.
I ran into you last time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I started to know people, and then it's always funny because there's like the casual observers, like the parents with children or whatever, but then there's also like the more hardcore, the ones that are out there. I find that are like really, really interested in what you find, like or if I have my little box, because I look at my little box.
Yeah.
People are like, oh, that's a great idea. Or your flashlight. Oh, or the chest waders. I gotta do that. And then you know you're gonna see them back there again.
Yeah, no, for sure. And like it's easy to just get hooked so quickly on it, and then you're like, oh, I gotta get this thing and that thing. And the only way you learn about it is by seeing other people.
Right. And so it's like being out there in the field is like the best way to introduce other people to it. Of course, you have to get there in the first place, but once they're there, then they're totally hooked.
Yeah.
So what is like some of the species that in California that you wish we had here?
Well, I don't want to like wish they were here because that would mean some climate bad thing.
You wish you could see more often. How about that?
Well, definitely Spanish shawl, which is just this like bright purple, like neon purple sea slug that has like bright orange serrata coming from it. It's definitely one of my favorites that I've only seen once or twice, but I've seen a couple of times out there. I think it would be super cool to see one out here. They have been documented. So a lot of the species that I do see in California, they have been documented out in Washington. It's just more like, why were they there that one time? Is it like I'm not seeing them, but they are here? Do they just not exist on docks? So Spanish shawl would be one. Hopkins rose. I've heard that there's beaches in California where you would see like tons of them everywhere, and I've never seen that many of them there, and I've definitely never seen them out here.
Yeah.
And they're funny because they look like they're made out of long bits of like pink Play-Doh almost. They're really strange. And I think one of my favorites is the colorful Dirona, because they're such strange looking slugs, and they're, if you think about like a white line Dirona and then kind of sprinkle it with fairy dust and make it translucent, like that's kind of what the colorful Dirona look like. They just don't make any sense. They have a lot more texture to them too. It's just like they're very psychedelic and trippy looking, and I wish that they were out here because I think they would come in so many different interesting forms, like photograph repeatedly.
That's funny. I don't think I've seen that one.
No, they're. I don't see them very often when I'm down there. It's not one of those species like, with some species you see one, you're going to see a whole bunch.
Right.
With these, it's like I just see one at a time.
Were they in the Bay Area or further south?
I've seen them anywhere from like, I want to say like Morro Bay, Monterey, down to that area. So I think they're all up and down. Okay. Yeah, I think they're pretty all over the place. I don't think just one area.
Okay, I gotta look next time. Not coming home until I find one.
Yeah, no, definitely.
And there's one. It's not a nudibranch, but a sea slug. The one that's in Oakland.
Oh gosh.
In the Bay.
Not a sea slug, but a non-nudibranch.
Is it a nudibranch?
Which one? There's a few different ones.
Only found in that bay.
So there's some that are just found in Lake Merritt.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's the Lake Merritt Casona, which I've never seen. Okay. And there's probably other species in Lake Merritt. So Lake Merritt's very interesting because it is a lake, but it's fed into by the salt water. So it has a bit different of an environment than what you would see normally. It's a bit more brackish, so you get different species. And because of the international boat traffic of the San Francisco Bay Area, you get weird things popping up there. So I think there's been a few like Japanese species of nudibranch that have been seen out there. You just get different types of slugs. Hedge pastorid is not uncommon, but you see a lot of them in Lake Merritt as well. That was the one I saw the most. Okay. And then I think it's called like a endomorph sapping sea slug or something like that. Just another sapsucker that I find there, but it just varies a lot. It's just a weird place to go look for things. Yeah,
because it's like it blows my mind. Like it's a lake, but it's got salt water. And it used to be like really, really, really toxic.
Oh, I think it is
it's
still.
toxic?
Yeah, there was a very like toxic algal bloom, I think, that happened. I want to say just over a year ago that a bunch of people were posting about, but it must have recovered from that because I've seen like people having a lot of nudibranch observations again, so it must have cleared itself out in some fashion.
That's fascinating, and like the idea that nudibranchs can travel by ships is also really fascinating. Because I mean, a lot of marine organisms do. Like the tunicates we have here, a lot of them came from Japan on ships.
Right.
And not like it's stuck to the ship, but like usually in the water, right? In the I don't know what the term for that is.
I think it might have been the hedgepest, but there was one species where you could see that it had clearly moved from dock to dock because it was like on a dock in Australia and then like one on the west coast of the U.S. So you could see that the observations were all dock based, so they were definitely moving around on boats, and like they live in such small like pieces of territory, like some of them might spend their whole life just on one bryozoa, so you can imagine how readily they could just be attached to a boat and live out their whole life and like some kind of little ant farm scenario, and then just be whisked away somewhere else and to begin a new life. That's not studied at all.
Oh, the distribution of nudibranchs like that.
No, I think iNaturalist is probably one of the best tools for that. Yeah. I mean, I use it quite a bit to see where things are, but then it's like, are they the same species? Unless you're sequencing them, you don't really know.
Right.
And then you get back to the like, well, what do we call a species anyway? So it's like, is it just the visual parts, or it does get very complicated.
That's really interesting. It's really interesting to think of how they're distributed because we also don't really know like their larval stage when they're floating around in the ocean. Like we do know that a lot of nudibranchs have the ranges. They're like in the Northwest, or they're in the Indo-Pacific or Mexico or whatever. But like when they're larval, do they care? Like if they get into cold water, do they just die? Or what happens to them?
No, I don't know. I think that's a great question because how far could they be transported? You don't know.
Right.
Is it like seeds? I think of them as like sea slug seeds, but I don't think it really works that way.
Little seeds. I mean, like mushrooms and slime molds, the spores go up in the air and they just travel around the world, so they could like land anywhere. So like, why aren't nudibranchs the same? I mean,
they very well
barnacles,
could be.
Everything larval. Yeah, they could just be out there. Could scoop out some ocean water and look through all the larvae.
No, that would be super cool. I don't know if you could tell what they were though.
Yeah, they might not be documented. I mean, yeah, it'd be interesting to know how many nudibranchs have been documented through their entire life cycle. Like,
probably like 3.
Yeah, since they're really hard to keep, even for scientists. It's hard to keep them in aquariums.
No, one of the most studied species is the Hermesenda crassicornis, the horned nudibranch, because of how diverse their diet is, that they're a lot easier to maintain, and they've been studied for all sorts of different things because of that.
So it's hard to study. So we don't know like their life cycles and how long they live and just all these things about them. And most of them only live for one season anyway, right?
Right, like a couple weeks. I know there's a few species that can live a couple years, which just seems like so long, but I mean they do have these amazing regenerative properties. Like if they lose serrata, no problem, they can grow that back. I've seen them with like part of an oral tentacle missing and it starts to grow back. Like they seem very resilient in some ways, but then like very delicate in others. Like they will not, some species will not eat another food even if it's very similar. They would just starve to death. They won't try something else, as it were.
I found one just this last low tide that had the rhinophore that was split. So it's like, what's it like?
The like bifurcated.
Yeah.
And yeah, I've seen that before too. And I don't know if it's something that occurs naturally or if it's because it was damaged and then it grew back. I've seen that with the serrata as well, like bifurcation. Like some species, like the Dendronotus species, they bifurcate naturally, but like with aelids, I've seen that too, so I don't know what causes it.
It's interesting. So much to know, so much to learn.
Yeah.
So what are your favorite species here that you like to find?
Oh my gosh. I don't really have a favorite species. I have like a least favorite species, but like the favorite species is like either the most new species that I've seen or something that I haven't seen for a long time. Like people ask like, well, what are you looking for? And my answer is whatever's there.
Right.
Like I just want to see what's there. I'm not looking for something specific. I mean, hedge pest sapsuckers are always kind of special when I see them. Anything, because they utilize chloroplasts in the algae to photosynthesize, and it like they just look amazing and sparkly and like a wizard imbued magic powers on a piece of kale. Like they're very strange, and they're non-nudibranchs, but I see them quite a bit, and I don't get tired of them. But a lot of the species, it'll be like, oh, I just saw 100 of those. I'm very tired of them. So it just depends, like how many and how sick I am of seeing
You
the
must be
same.
talking about shaggy mouse.
Yeah, they're the worst. But I love hating them. I really do love them, but they're terrible.
Especially when they're mating, because then they're all over the docks and their
They're
eggs
so
are everywhere.
blobby. Yeah, their egg masses are just like huge and gelatinous, and they're not content with just like two of them mating together. They have to have like a whole pile of them, and they'll like. I think the worst part is them eating the anemones, and it's like, okay, yes, I might be a little sad that the anemone's getting eaten, but it's more because it's so messy. They'll like bite into this plumose anemone, and the thing's not dying right away. It's like shooting out its like defense tentacles, and it's like all over the slug, and the slug's like slowly like gnawing away at it. So you'll just encounter like this static scene of like this. And they're not attractive slugs. Like they're like they look like scrubby brushes or like grayed out ground beef or something like that. So they aren't cute to begin with, and they're just like covered in like anemone bits and egg and like you don't see any other sea slugs because they've eaten everything. You're just like, oh. And you don't see one or two. There's hundreds of them at once. So when I see them, I'm just like...
Piles and piles of shaggy mouse.
Yes. I think birds tried to eat them, though.
Oh, do they?
I think so. I started noticing on the docks that I noticed that there was this like dead like shaggy rug on the dock, and it was like covered in mucus, like something had just spat it out, and there was like serrata everywhere, and it left like this weird imprint on the cement. And then when I started looking around, I noticed there was like serrata imprints all over the dock. And like it's not a big leap because you think about seagulls, they're just trying to eat anything. And with these slugs, there's so many of them like right by the surface that you could just see like even accidentally they eat one and they're like oh, and then they like spit it out, but it's too late. There's just serrata everywhere.
Poor goal.
Yeah, but it's like I don't know if I feel sorry for either of them.
Deserve each other.
Yeah, exactly.
It's funny that you mentioned that because not a lot eat nudibranchs.
No, and I don't think that they're being successful at eating them, but I think they're trying. Only other nudibranchs eat nudibranchs for the most part.
So it's just kind of cool. It's like they're kind of badass.
Yeah,
I mean,
no, they're totally badass.
They look cool. They're like completely wild in their appearance. It's like, hey, slug, we're gonna like expand on that and like just go wild with the concept of slug.
Yeah.
And then they know nothing can eat them.
And they're hermaphrodites, so they can reproduce with anybody, you know.
And it looks like a pretty good life, right?
Yeah. If you don't mind like chunks getting missing of you, you know.
Eating the same exact food every day.
Yes. Oh no, I lost another serrata.
I did see somebody on social media, I forget where exactly, that they were posting the shaggy mouse with under the black light. And they're actually really cool, which I was surprised by.
Right. They're like pretty much the only species that I've seen that will react in any way to a black light, which you would think like sea slugs would just like, they would just like fluoresce with black light, but it's them and the striped nudibranchs were the only two species that I've seen react to, and I was like, oh, look, the shagrugs do have something nice about them.
And so those are like the two most bland species we have.
Coloration-wise, No, because I thought, well, maybe like blacklight would be this like magic nudibranch finding tool, but no.
Yeah, I thought that too. Like, I was so disappointed.
Yeah, it doesn't help.
I mean, the aggregating anemones look really cool under the blacklight. But
aren't you horrified when you use the blacklight because you're like, oh, I'm stepping on everybody all the time?
Yep. You can see how many there are. Yeah. Yeah. Like on alki, you can't walk because there's so many of them. But then turn the blacklight off and
oh, it's fine again.
They're squishy. They're fine, right?
They're all clones. It's fine.
So I wanted to ask you also, so if somebody wants to go to a dock, what are your tips for finding? Well, first, like, what kind of gear? Because I learned from you about knee pads. Because the first time I went out, I didn't have knee pads, and I had massive bruises on my knees, and my chest was all bruised and, like, sore. So what are your tips and tricks for?
So knee pads, I mean, you could even just bring a towel to lay on, just something to protect you from, because nobody's, like, manicuring this dock to make it comfortable to lay on. There's like nails coming out of it, there's splintery bits of wood,
ghoul poo.
Yeah, there's seal poo. So like if you had even I wouldn't recommend waders necessarily, but like I have those like I don't know what they're called, the fisherman bib things. That helps. That would be the main thing I would invest in, because it doesn't really matter what you're wearing on your shoes or anything like that. And then having the camera, obviously, and it's not just so you can show off to everybody on the internet. There's just some features of nudibranchs that you're not going to be able to perceive with your eye. So it's like when you get home and look at all your photos, that's when you know what you've looked at, and in turn that will train your eye back. Having something like a bowl could be helpful. I personally am not very comfortable removing organisms because I don't feel like I can necessarily put them back in a safe way, but if you are familiar and comfortable with them, putting them into the bowl, and that way you can get a better look and photograph them. I went through a phase where I had this telescoping snake hook, which I really liked, which I would use to like get a piece of algae closer to me, a blade of kelp, but I found that like it would just rust out every couple of times, but having some kind of like stick or something to bring things closer to you, that helps a lot.
So otherwise you might fall in.
Yeah, I mean I haven't yet, but
I've come close to like reaching too far.
Yeah. If you have a buddy, they can hold your legs. That's always helpful. But it doesn't really like require much, which I also like about it. You know, like if you were out and about, in theory, you could go do it with nothing.
Right.
You don't have to have anything.
Do you use a flashlight? Because I like a flashlight, especially if you're on the dark side of the dock.
I've only recently started using a flashlight. I find it tricky because I just like get in my own way with it. Like I get in my shadow. I'm just bad at it, and I've like fried a bunch of lights as well. Because like I'll be looking at something and then it'll go into the water, and I'm like, oh, that wasn't meant to go in there.
Yeah, mine's a diving light, so it's meant to go.
Yeah, so. I should probably do something like that.
And it's super bright. It's like really bright, so it helps, especially when you're looking for something small like a nudibranch. Which are hard to find. So do you have tricks in like how to, I mean, other than like learning to look for them, which you eventually kind of get your eyes in, but what are your tricks? Obviously like sorting through bryozoa and hydroids.
Right. I mean, I don't think there is many like tricks as such. It really is just familiarizing yourself, and it's creating that like pattern recognition in your brain. I find that that's the biggest thing, and it does help me to familiarize myself, even if it with a book or with images online, like with what things potentially could look like before I go out. But I do find that it's just repetition. It really is. Like there's not a shortcut around it. And you know, if you've done tide pooling or like interacted with them in some other way, I think it does really help. But I think it's definitely like adjusting your scale as well to like be looking for the right size of thing. I think it's hard unless you've seen one in person to really understand how tiny they are.
Yeah. Yeah, it's surprising. It's like you can say this is tiny, but until you actually see one, you don't understand tiny.
Yeah, and I think it's like familiarizing yourself with everything else that is there too.
Right.
Even if it's not, you don't need to know their names, but just like knowing what each thing is, because then your brain can like look at the landscape and kind of filter out like that's not a slug, that's not a slug, and they also move unlike the other stuff that's there. So a little bit of shiny movement that can help you hone in on it.
Right, and it's still tricky. Like even this long now that I'm doing this, like is that a nudibranch? Oh no, it's an anemone. I mean, it's still like and then like so some of them are so small, like almost microscopic small, and even with the camera. And that's the other good thing about the camera. You can do a macro lens and do like the microscope view, which your eyes just can't see.
Well, one thing that like blows my mind is sometimes you'll get this photo of like this impossibly tiny slug, and then you'll look in the photo and it has an impossibly tinier slug like right next to it, and you're just like, how does that even exist? And it's so weird because like some species, the tiny version of them is just like a shrunk down version of the regular one. Like they'll look exactly the same, like perfectly formed, but then other species, like the juvenile version looks a lot different, and you'll think it's a different species.
Right. They're never easy, are they?
No.
What's the most interesting or unusual one that you found up here? Or ones?
Unusual in the sense that they're uncommon, or?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I saw this sea butterfly once, and that was really interesting because they aren't like super uncommon, but they just aren't something that you would normally find on a dock, and they're free swimming, so it's like you wouldn't look at them just kind of statically laying there. And I only ever saw it once, and it was after very heavy rain, so I can only imagine it might have gotten like washed in from the depths or something like that. But those are very strange looking. They look like elongated like glowworms almost with wings, and they flap around. I would love to see one of those again. And then it's just like seeing species that you wouldn't expect to see. That's always interesting. There was a species out here, Pacifica amia, which was described by a local scuba diver, Karen Fletcher, and the only documented observations of them were her scuba diving observations that I think she found somewhere off the water in Tacoma. And it's a species that I have observed on the docks, and it looks like it's a aelid, so elongated body kind of sea slug that closely resembles to the naked eye like other species that you would see here. And it's like looking through my photos, you notice like a different characteristic to it, and you go, oh, what is that? And then just seeing that it's something only one other person has seen, like that's super cool.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, I just extended its known range. I mean, it might be by like, I don't know, 10,000 feet, but it's still like you contributed somehow to the knowledge about this creature.
That's really cool. That's like blows my mind that we can do that, and not being like scientists or anything.
Yeah, no, for sure. Like anybody can do it.
So, there's like so many questions I want to ask about local nudibranchs too. What's the most interesting? Like not like most uncommon, but what's the one that you find the most interesting here?
Like in terms of its like life cycle?
Yeah, life, or what it looks like, or where it's found, or.
That's a difficult question because like I think like a lot of species have something interesting about them. I mean, I'm trying to think of like the rainbow nudibranch keeps on coming to mind. I mean, I guess they renamed its common name to giant nudibranch, but it's Dendronodocyrus, and those are very interesting because they're a species where they do look quite different from their like juvenile to adult form, and they start off very, very, very tiny, and they look more like other species of Dendronodus just with their coloration. And then as they grow, they become like shaggier and kind of, I mean, they branch out and have these crazy looking
Right.
serrata. They almost look like if somebody took a microscopic image of a hair follicle and then elongated it into a creature and had it all branch out. That's what they look like. And those swim. I think that their natural habitat wouldn't be the docks. Like, I don't think that they actually live on docks, but I can see them there because they're able to swim, and they're the species that like moves back and forth, and they look almost like a weird like raw chicken, like contorting in the water, getting from one place to the next. They're very bizarre, but they I think that the tube dwelling anemones, so those are at the bottom of the ocean, so you just see them when they come up to the top. But I think in their juvenile form, they probably eat something else, because you find them in these big clusters of hydroid. I saw a bunch today, like in this big shaggy thing of like seaweed and hydroid, just very, very tiny ones.
So cute though.
Yeah, and it's like in a while I'll be sick of them, because when you start seeing them, you're going to see like hundreds of them.
Right.
But I think they're a very like classic Pacific Northwest kind of species. A lot of people love the white-lined dirona with how beautiful they look, or golden dirona.
Yeah.
That would be a species that I don't get to see that often, and whenever I do, I'm kind of like, ooh, golden dirona, because you only ever see like one at a time.
Right.
But they can get like quite big too, like the size of your hand, I would say almost.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
I've never seen them quite that big, but yeah, I've seen a few. And they're always tricky because, like you said earlier, the white-lined dironas can change color.
Mm-hmm.
So when they eat the seed pens, I've seen them like that are almost completely orange.
Right.
I'm like, is that a gold? No, it's just the white
No,
line.
the golden dirona, they have the like white outline, and they have like little white freckles.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep. Until I realized that, I was so excited. I kept thinking I was finding them, and I realized no, I'm not finding them.
Mm-hmm.
And then I did find one like the very next day. So
There you go.
So yeah, it worked out in the end. But yeah, no, those are certainly fun. I mean, they're all fun.
Yeah.
Oh, except for the shaggy mouse.
I mean, they're fun to hate, though.
I mean, they're kind of like just how abundant they are,
Right.
especially in their mating masses.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like a whole spectacle itself.
Yeah, no, definitely. So. It's very grotesque, and I like it for that. Because they just get so fat, too, and chunky.
Right.
Like, I think if a nudibranch could live indefinitely, it would just, like, keep eating and growing. Because I've seen, like, obnoxiously large ones,
Until they were, like, the size
Yeah.
of a whale.
I think they would if their lifespan, didn't end.
That'd be cool to see. I'm gonna write a fantasy book about life, whale-sized nudibranchs taking over the oceans.
I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, maybe they existed because, with nudibranchs, there's not much they leave behind when they die, so we don't have, like, any sort of fossil record of them. I've always been, like, fascinated with the idea of, like, if people, prior to, like, a scientific age saw a nudibranch, like, what did they make of that?
Right.
They're such strange creatures. Or did they see them? I don't know.
Maybe they didn't notice.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nobody even pays attention to nudibranchs.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder what the oldest record is of nudibranchs.
I've wondered that, yeah.
Huh.
I would want to know, like, the oldest natural record. So, like, I know recently they found this very well preserved sea squirt. I don't know if you would call it a fossil. I'm not sure what's left behind of it, but it was like 500,000 years old.
Huh.
It'll be interesting to know what the nudibranch version of that is.
Yeah.
I don't know what they would leave behind.
Yeah, I wonder. Maybe when I start doing research, I'll find out.
Yeah, at home I have a jar of dried out barnacle-eating nudibranchs, and I think that I've never seen like a dried out nudibranch corpse before or after since then. But it was on a floating dock in where is it, Port Townsend. So on the posts, right, the posts stay static and the dock goes down. So I think the slugs were on the post and the tide went down. And then they fell off the post onto the dock, and then they dried out in the sun. I don't know how many other situations that would happen. You would have anything left behind.
Yeah. Poor little guys.
I know.
I wonder if a gold knocked them off or something, or if they just like... Because like when a nudibranch sticks onto something, they stick on really well.
Right, but when they don't, they don't. I think some of them... I don't know. I feel like they would like shrivel and then just kind of like fall off.
Yeah. Maybe it was like particularly hot day or something.
Yeah, it was hot, definitely. And there was a bunch of them, so it wasn't just one.
And I've tried to like poke them off something before, and it's like you really can't.
No,
They're glued.
no.
It's like they're
Or
glued.
should
Yeah.
you?
No, you shouldn't. No. No. Yeah. Definitely not. And that's something else about like the docks. The benefit of the camera, because you can't really pry them off unless you're gonna like stick your head under the water. You can't really get a good view of them, especially if they're down low.
Yeah, no, exactly. And if there's any sort of like disturbance on the surface of the water, like forget about it.
Right. That's why I try to take my little box. But even in, like on the docks, if there's any sort of wake, it just gets flooded. So
yeah,
it's
exactly.
limited use. It's good under certain circumstances, but not all. So yeah, don't bother on a windy day.
No, and it's so hard to predict like when a good day will be and when it won't.
Right, especially like in Seattle, we don't have many docks, so we kind of have to go further afield. So it's like you don't want to have to waste a trip.
Exactly.
But,
yeah. No, it's good that more people have started doing it out here because, I used to have like no sort of intelligence on what's happening, but now I can like reach out to somebody and be like, hey, did you see anything? What are you seeing? Or even better, they put it on iNaturalist, so it helps out a bit. You're not going to waste your time as much.
Right.
But then I always think like, is that the moment when I could have seen something new or unexpected?
Right. So if you rely on that, then you don't get the unexpected new discoveries. So yeah, so it's good to go anyway. So that's good. On that note, I think it's almost 5 o'clock.
Oh, dang.
So that flew by.
Yeah, it did.
I mean, I just I'm not talking about nudibranchs.
I know.
So thank you. That was fun. That was a lot of fun.
Thank
Of
you.
course, talking to nudibranchs is always fun.
Yes.
Talking about nudibranchs. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. It was a good time.
All right. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next time.